Welcome everyone, and welcome to the first committee meeting of Natural Resources and Environmental Sustainability in the new year. I'd like to welcome everyone here in the gallery today. We don't usually have this many people here for a committee meeting, so it's good to see. And I'd also like to welcome our guest today, Mr. Horace Carver, a former member of the legislature, a cabinet minister, and I'm sure many other titles that I'm missing as well. I guess, do we have a motion for the adoption of the agenda? Lynn? Shall carry? And with that, we're going to jump right into to your presentation, and if you can just state your name and
Sure.
for answer when you start.
Name is Horace Carver.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, other members of the legislature, very pleased to have accepted your written invitation to be here today, to appear before this committee. My report started in January of 2013, was submitted to the Premier and the government of the day in June of 2013, and it was released by the government of the day in November of 2013. At that time, there was a press conference in the room across the way in the first level, and since that time, I have not spoken publicly about the report. I have turned down several media interviews, and I have turned down various speaking opportunities. And I have done that because, in my mind, the issues involved are much larger than Horace Carver, and I'm not particularly interested in being the focus. And I have opinions as are expressed in the report at that particular point in time, and there have been various things that have happened since then, and I'm prepared to give you comments that I make in relation to the report. But remember, the report was done basically 7 years ago. It was initiated as a review by the GIZ government on the 30th anniversary of the implementation of the Lands Protection Report in 1982. Another 3 years will be the 40th anniversary. Okay? And I might say that there has been a fair bit of reference in the media and various topics of discussion pertaining to land, and invariably several names get mentioned, and one is the late Premier Angus MacLean. He and I were very close friends. And it's amazing how time marches on. February the 15th, next month, Premier MacLean will have passed away 20 years ago. On the 10th anniversary of his death, I wrote an extensive opinion to The Guardian about certain things that Angus MacLean had said. It had been my intention to perhaps do one on the 20th anniversary, but I'm going to allow my appearance today to be in lieu of taking up any time of writing to local newspapers in that particular regard. And there's several things I guess I would like to say starting off. I know that there are current issues that people wish to discuss, and that is fine. But unless we understand from whence we have come, in my opinion, we no longer know where we are, and maybe don't have much of a sense of focus or direction where we want to go and where we need to go. In my report, which I'm sure you have, it's online and so forth, it sets out some legislative history, which I really don't intend to go into in my opening comments. And it talks a little bit about the history of land and ownership in this particular province. Sometimes there's a tendency to think that this was a long time ago. Well, my family came here as Knight of the Empire Loyalists in 1785. And my great-great-grandfather Carver, who lived to be an old man in his 90s, and who was known to my grandfather as a youth, my grandfather's youth, he was a tenant farmer for over 60 years of where he was never able to own the land. Yet, he was a tenant farmer and he paid his rent. From all reports, he was a happy individual. He lived in Hazelbrook. His wife was from Alexandria, and they had 10 children. Okay? But, so when you say, oh, that was a long time ago, absentee landness and everything, it isn't quite as long ago as some people might think. And I was interested in politics as a youth, but didn't get elected as early as the chair did. You beat me by a couple of years. But in 1979, 78, some rather unique elections happened that, in my opinion, affected this matter of land in a way that it hadn't been affected before. Some good work had been done by Premier Alec Campbell's government in the 60s and early 70s. In 1978, his government was re-elected for a fourth term by a very slim majority. He resigned and went to the Supreme Court, where some former politicians have been able to go. Others practice law. And in 1979, Premier McLean formed a government. On May the 3rd, 1979, Angus MacLean was Premier and I was a member of that government. At that time, there was a lot of discussion about corporate ownership, farming verification, and all that type of thing. And early in his mandate, Premier McLean directed there was going to be an amendment made to the Companies Act that we would know who the shareholders of the company was. I was the person he charged with doing it. I happened to be Attorney General and Government House Leader. Later that month, in May of '79, a short-lived 9-month Conservative government was elected in Ottawa. The following February, a new Liberal government was returned to power, Prime Minister Trudeau once again. And this is where life becomes really, really interesting with regards land and property rights in this country. And I remember at the time when Jean Chrétien was Attorney General of Prince Edward Island, a very interesting person, someone who I regard as a friend, and incidentally, whose older brother went to St. Dunstan's University. He did a cross-country tour to meet the premiers and attorney generals. And when he came to Prince Edward Island, he met myself, my colleague down below, Fred Driscoll, Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs, Premier McLean, and other representatives of an advisory capacity to the Premier. And anyway, after the meeting was all over, a longtime government advisor said to me, the federal government is not accustomed to having an island premier and island ministers talk the way you talk to the government of Canada today. Well, so what? Equal province last time I looked. It all started here or next door. But what did happen was this. Prime Minister Trudeau decided that because of the referendum in Quebec and everything that happened there, that the Canadian Constitution, then BNA Act, was coming home from London. There was going to be a Charter of Rights and Freedoms included, and it was going to happen. Now, I have strong opinions on his style of making that happen, but the net result was that the first draft, public draft, of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms stipulated that property rights were enshrined in the Constitution to be of Canada. Not good for what laws Prince Edward Island had had in the past in respect to land. And then the summer of 1980, Mr. Driscoll and I were involved in representing this province in meetings with the provincial and federal counterparts, and then the famous conference in September of 1980. We took the strong position that property rights being guaranteed to any resident, and that's the wording, not citizen, but any resident in Canada, someone who, as I said, could just get off the plane in Ottawa from Russia and decide they're going to stay a period of time, was a resident of Canada and therefore entitled to buy land and everything like that in Princetown pertaining to property. It was tough slugging during those federal provincial conferences in that summer. In fact, I felt like a broken record. I felt that people had stopped listening at certain levels of the national government because here was Maclean and Carver and Driscoll, and here they were again on whatever. In any event, this province participated in the big conference of September of 1980. There's a lot of stories that haven't yet been told about how that conference operated in many ways, but I do refer to that conference in my opening statement, which is on page 1. And what I do say in a verbal exchange, First Ministers and Attorneys General at the old train station in Ottawa, now the Senate, is that Prime Minister Trudeau and I got into a battle that day. And on that occasion, I argued very strenuously that property rights was really going to the heart of this province in its ability to control land. And I said, we believe that domicile has rights and responsibilities with it, and that being a domiciled resident of my province means I have a greater stake in it. The most valuable resource is not the oil, possible gas, and uranium, but the top 10 inches of this soil, our soil. And this is the most valuable aspect to us and how we're going to survive in the years to come. Now, that exchange is recorded. It's been printed and it's recorded and so forth. And I don't mind saying, I was only 30, I guess, at the time, that my knees shook like never before. Anyway, and the conference was, in the eyes of many, a total failure. Provinces fighting with other provinces, mostly with the federal government, strong personalities, the Premier of Quebec and Prime Minister of Canada and so forth. And I'll never forget what Premier Maclean said that day in his closing remarks when the conference wrapped up. And in part he said this, I want to talk to new Canadians. I want to talk to people that don't understand the history of this country. I want you to understand, he says, that the sun will set tonight and the sun will rise tomorrow morning. And this country has basically a glorious future, even though today you may be disappointed with the results. Those are paraphrased. But what he was trying to say, this distinguished islander, Canadian, is do not be in total sense of despair. Hope is not lost. Anyway, that was September of 1980. More constitutional discussions, court cases in Manitoba, Quebec, and Newfoundland, fighting provinces with the federal government, with a couple of provinces, Ontario and New Brunswick, on the side of the federal government, going to the Supreme Court of Canada. And like a lot of things, there is something that is legal and then there is accepted political convention. I remember being at a great big powwow the night before the decision of the Supreme Court of Canada. There were attorney generals, there were some of the top legal advisors in the country to these provinces, and we all went around the table, the elected officials, and indicate, what do you think is going to happen tomorrow? A Supreme Court decision. They came to me, and I said, I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, but I know this. Whatever these legal geniuses around the table think is going to happen tomorrow is not going to happen tomorrow, because the Supreme Court of Canada is going to surprise us. And that is exactly what the Supreme Court of Canada did. It said that what the Prime Minister was trying to do, with the support of a couple of provinces, was, for all intents and purposes, legal. It was probably enough support to go to the Parliament in London, have the Queen sign the bill to become part. But it went on to say, it really doesn't meet the test of the accepted political convention in this country, that there ought to be significant provincial support. Okay? Law is important, but conventions accepted in our society are important as well. What that did is that forced the federal government to come back and negotiate. It forced people to put a little bit of wine in their water from their respective strong points of view. And we got to a meeting in the Chateau Laurier in the first week in November 1981, exactly 2 weeks before Angus MacLean was no longer Premier of the province. And a deal was brokered. Unfortunately, that deal left out the province of Quebec. And it has been described in many ways as a scar on our modern political history, the Night of the Long Knives, and so forth. However, and I was involved in those discussions that night, but what happened was, between the initial position of Prime Minister Trudeau and the Government of Canada, the property rights were going to be included in the Constitution. Somewhere along the line, and the documents that we're now going to present to London before the final meeting that night, we had the provision of the property rights clause removed from the Charter of Rights and Freedom. Didn't happen that night, it had been removed earlier. How was it removed? Well, can I tell you that I don't know 100% for sure, but I have an unreasonably good authority that some people who were supporting the position of the federal government let it be known to the Prime Minister that they respected our position. They respected what the little province said, and we won the day. Okay? And if you don't believe that, you do not understand island history. Okay? There could have been no Lands Protection Act in May of 1982 that I sat there and sponsored through this House, which was a result of the Agricultural Committee report, if we had lost the day on the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Game over. Game over. And if people want to talk about the current situation, let us at least be respectful enough to acknowledge how we have the ability to continue to do this. Okay? Now, one can say, and I've given this considerable thought, well, if we had lost that fight on the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, there would have still been an out for this province. And that is true constitutionally and legally. That out would have been the notwithstanding clause. Okay? So if the Charter of Rights and Freedoms said property rights ownership was okay, then our out as a province would have been to pass a bill like the Lands Protection Act and say, notwithstanding this particular provision of Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, we are going to pass this bill. Yes, except that is only second or third best, for the reason that any bill passed as a notwithstanding bill is only valid for 5 years. Why? Because Prime Minister Trudeau would only agree to the 5-year thing. He wouldn't agree to notwithstanding, because he said that means that there have to be an election during the 5-year period, and the people will pronounce their opinion on whether that bill is something that they want to have enacted into law as an exception to Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. I know enough about politics. Hopefully you guys do too. That things change. Don't get too comfortable in your seats. I don't think any of you are lawyers, but after I was here for 3 terms, a small majority, but sufficient, decided it would be better if Horace Carver practiced law full-time. So those things do happen. Enjoy it when you're here. In addition to enjoying it when you're here, make sure you're effective leaders while you're here. So one can say that after that agreement in November of 1981, we were home free. No, we weren't. Trouble happened from several unexpected quarters. The documents had to go through the House of Commons, they had to go through the Senate, they had to go to Westminster and all that type of stuff. And the next thing we know, former Prime Minister Joe Clark, now Conservative opposition leader, the Conservative Party decided that they wanted to have property rights put in the Constitution, even though it had already been agreed with the federal government and so forth. Well, anyway, I was dispatched to Ottawa, carrying a letter from Angus MacLean that I read, and I forget if it was the House of Commons or the Senate committee, doesn't make any difference, I think it was both. And they couldn't believe it, that a Conservative Premier and government, a Conservative Attorney General, was taking a position different than the federal Conservative Party. Well, I don't know why they found that so darn difficult. The federal Conservative Party's position was wrong. And then we got it through, went through Parliament and went through Ottawa and went through the provinces, except for Quebec, went to Ottawa, I went to London, the Queen in Quebec, and then it was all proclaimed effective in April 1982. Now, just when you think things might have been a little quiet, trouble happens again. The Charlottetown Accord came up, 1991-92, and what did it have? Property rights made its ugly appearance again. And I found myself as a private citizen then, appearing before the joint House Commons Senate Committee in the place across the way, arguing against that particular adoption. This province voted for the Accord, but it was defeated, and so was that matter of property rights. But I'm telling you, folks, it is still out there at certain levels of political life in this country. So it's something that we need to always be aware of in that particular regard. Now, I just see that my opening comments are about twice the length that my notes indicate. This is the third time that I've ever appeared before a legislative committee. I have made certain personal rules that when I left public life, and they're very simple. You can say, hey, you don't need to know them. Well, guess what, you're here. Haven't told anybody recently. But I just decided that you're either in the role of an MLA or you're not. And there have been 3 times that I've appeared before a legislative committee. One is Premier Joe Giz asked me if I would appear before this committee of the House on the Meech Lake Accord. And I said, I will, but Joe, I'll say what I think about the Accord, not what you think I should say. He laughed. He says, I expect nothing different. And I did that. And at that particular point in time, I supported the Accord and indicated that the biggest danger, in my opinion, that we had as a province going forward is the risk of forgetting the jurisdiction that we have as a province and a political entity. There are too many organizations at political level inside and outside this province, and you can say, how could it be inside this province? Well, do you know that a number of years ago, in the mid-90s, a provincial government in Atlantic Canada did a poll of our citizens to find out how many people would like to join Maritime Union or Atlantica. What? Well, as Premier McLean used to say, not all the fanatics are in the other party. So the second time I appeared, that was by invitation. Second time I appeared was in 2006 or so, because I felt that very strongly that in addition to our land, our young people who were having difficulty in school and education needed extra help. They needed extra help how to learn, and because they learn differently, and I appeared before the committee, Robert Giz was leader of the opposition, the Conservatives were in power, and I argued that $1 million be added to the budget for additional learning. Local media were present. I guess it didn't do very well. Didn't make the local papers or reports in the media, and the $1 million never got added to the budget. However, the third time is your invitation. Okay? And I have gladly accepted. I hope that you're not disappointed. I will answer your questions to the best of my ability. But this is not about me. This is about you. This is about this panel of people back here that if there were a jury, they could be a tough act to get. And there are other people watching, I know. But these are important issues that need to be discussed. And if we fail to discuss them, and the other thing I guess I'll say before I turn this over is this. George Etienne Cartier, when he was here in 1864, and the subsequent conference in 1865, in Halifax, and racing out of the house this morning, I technically forgot to grab the book where it's in, but it is in here someplace, and that basically says this: all problems are capable of solution if they are approached with the right spirit and having a firm will and a good heart. On the land issue, I don't think there's any difficulty in finding people who hold spirited points of view. I don't think it's hard to find people who have firm and strong opinions. But for me, when I did the land report in 2013, I can't sing, but I always sort of like Frank Sinatra's song, I Did It My Way. It was suggested by government officials who were given to assist me, and I decided only to take one or two. And then I had J.P. Arsenault help me, who's here this morning. And certain suggestions, how to meet people and everything else. I said, well, those are good suggestions, and I'll take them under consideration, but these are the ones we're going to follow now. 15 meetings from tip to tip, right down to Murray Harbour. I went there for a couple of reasons. My late mother came from there. I wanted to see if there are any other issues in that area that might come to the fore. And we had some terrific meetings. I was humbled, absolutely humbled by the quality of presentations by people who are perhaps not overly accustomed to speaking and others who are, who addressed this land issue with such complete passion. And one of the things that I felt really, really pleased about is we're in North Rustico, and it was Easter. In fact, it was Holy Thursday. And there was this particular person who had attended a lot of meetings, and the person came up to me after the meeting and said, "Thank you, Horace. I have enjoyed these meetings so much." She said, "Really enjoyed them." I said, "Well, thank you." And she says, "You know, I have changed my mind on a few things." I said, "Oh, really? What have you changed your mind on?" Well, she says, "I think I've become more mellow." She says, "Because I'm listening to people who have different points of view, and I'm starting to understand where they're coming from." Well, in my mind, that was one of the successes that I wanted to do. Is I didn't have it as formal as this place, didn't have people swear in as witnesses and anything like that. I came to meetings early, stayed late. And there were many people who sent me letters, stopped me in the street and so forth. And on pages 3 and 4 of the report, you will see that there are 16 different quotations from people. Some of them diametrically opposed to what the other person said. Okay? But if there was one that stuck in my mind, it would be the very last one. And there's one other comment that I didn't put there because I put it in the introduction of my statement. But anyway, this is what this young woman said. "I am hopeful that you, Mr. Carver, will be forward-thinking in your recommendations. PEI needs someone to envision a future for us that is beyond the imagination of most of us at the moment." Wow. That person was young. And she came to a couple of meetings, she spoke, she wrote me a letter. About 2 years ago, when I was going to the land registry office, and if I forget to mention that, Mr. Chair, before I leave, remind me to talk about the land registry office. That you have to sign in, get your name and telephone number, and beforehand, there was this young woman giving her name, and I thought I heard it. And I said, "Excuse me, are you Dawn Wilson?" And she says, "Yes." "Are you the Dawn Wilson who appeared before me and wrote me a letter? Are you the Dawn Wilson who is active in women's organizations and rural community projects?" "Yes." I said, "I quoted you in my report. I quoted you in my opening statement." And I simply thanked her again, because that is the sense of responsibility, obligation, and goal that you as members of this committee have, is to try to deal with some of these issues and to show leadership in that particular regard. At the O'Leary meeting, in which you happened to be present, Mr. Henderson, it had to be canceled, as I recall, because of weather. But anyway, we had it on a Saturday afternoon, and the meeting there, and after I had a little standard spiel, and after it was done, I said, "Now, these are what things we've heard. These are the issues that I'm supposed to look at." I said, "Tell me what you think, how this should be approached." And if you look at the opening title of my commissioner's message, it says this: "What's best for the land?" There was a chap there who had attended countless meetings, and he says, "What's best for the land?" And that is how I started the introduction of my message. Okay? There are other things that I intend to say before you excuse me, but I think I've said enough that it'll enable you and others to ask questions, make comments. But remember, this is not about Horace Carver. Horace Carver's report has spoken. I have been disappointed that certain aspects of the report have not been implemented, particularly those that cost money. Money? Well, Angus MacLean used to say, some things in life are just priceless. Anyway, apologize for taking longer than I should, Chair. But anyway, I throw it back to you.
Thank you. And I think we can jump right into questions. Who do we have? Lynn?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for appearing today. We absolutely appreciate the context. I've read through your report years ago, actually, and I found it really interesting. And a question you just pose in the report and now is what's best for the land? And I think that is a critical part of the discussion that we have to have here. How would you define the spirit and intent that the Lands Protection Act is supposed to have?
Well, if you look, Ms. Lund, at both the Act and my report, it quotes what the purposes of the Lands Protection Act is. It says what they are supposed to be, and it's set out there. Part of the problem is that...
It's on page 23.
Page 23. No, that's not it.
The act is to provide.
It's 9, thank you. You see, the problem is that you know this, but you're not sure what page it's on. Okay? So it talks about, and this was put in 1998. That was a powerful committee that was set up in this House in 1998. It did good work. Okay? And these are, and lawyers advised government, something tells me it might have been lawyers outside the province, but I may be wrong in that statement. So that's the purpose of it, okay? And it's a preamble. Not all acts have preambles. I had a little bit of a disagreement with the wonderful Legislative Council in 1982, Raymond Moore, who was, in my opinion, an outstanding leader as a Legislative Council, came from Northern Ireland via Bermuda and so forth. And he wasn't supportive of the idea of me having the act known as the Prince Edward Island Lands Protection Act, because every act in Prince Edward Island was a Prince Edward Island statute. I said, yes, but this act is going to be talked about, and we need to have Prince Edward Island in that. So the spirit, in my opinion, and one of the most courageous things, I would go so far as to say, Ms. Lund, the most courageous thing that Premier MacLean did. Yes, the Agricultural Committee supported his position, so that was no surprise. Public consultations happened, so forth, is that we put restrictions on the amount of corporate land ownership in this province. And I'll go so far as to say, perhaps even more important, put restrictions on the amount of land that residents of this province could own, namely 1,000 acres per person. That was historic. That had never been done before except in the Land Purchase Act of 1875. There was a 500-acre limit, but a lot of things had happened since then. So the spirit of the 1982 Act was this. Remember, Premier MacLean was no longer Premier since mid-November 1981, but his spirit was through it all, okay? He was still a member of the House, active member of the House. But the spirit was this, that land should not be viewed as a commodity traded on the stock market like silver and gold. Land should be viewed as a renewable resource to be protected for this generation and preceding generations. That was basically the theory. Do I think that what was put in law in 1982 would always stay? No. Not even the Constitution is that good. But it needs to be reviewed. It needs to be whatever from time to time. So that, in my opinion, and I can tell you this. If you look at my report, you say you read it, and I thank you for that, you're not going to find an executive summary. Okay? It was suggested to me by some that I have an executive summary. It was suggested by some that my 16 quotations be at the back of the report. No. I said, it's going to be at the front of those report, those 16 people. But I didn't have an executive summary because I wanted people to read the whole darn report. Okay? Now, I think I'm going to let you in on a little secret, and I'm aware of the fact that this little secret is being broadcast in their media here today. But I think the time has sort of come. And that is, there are 29 recommendations here. If there had been a 30th recommendation, it would have been found in the bottom of page 31. And I heard lots of conflicting points of view. I did. And J.P. Arsenault told me, he says, Horace, this is starting to concern you and bother you. I can see you're agitated by this. Don't be. At some point in your deliberations, and he never tried to influence me one way or the other assistants I had, it will become clear to you. Okay? And that, in truth, is how it became clear to me. And I'll come back to that a little bit later. But if you look at that paragraph on page 31, it says this. The Commission believes the provincial government must seek the views of islanders on the question of whether non-residents should be permitted to acquire large tracts of land. The related question of whether residents who are not bona fide farmers and who have no intention of farming should be able to hold 1,000 acres needs to be debated as well. In other words, how much is enough? And how much is too much? These are important questions that must be addressed, but further public discussion and debate are required. Those are important questions. I know that the mandate gave me the authority to talk about certain things that weren't really in the mainstream of it. And I can tell you that I did a first draft of recommendation 30. I saved it to the end because I struggled with it the most. And I concluded that this: why should Horace Carver, a Charlottetown lawyer, have a right to own 1,000 acres of farmland in this province if I don't farm? Okay? The truth is, I don't own any land in Prince Edward Island. My wife owns half an acre in Charlottetown. That's where her house is. That's the sum total of how much land Horace Carver and his wife own. But if you know me well, on a sunny afternoon, even if it's not on Friday afternoon, you will find me out in rural Prince Edward Island, all over the place, soaking in the soil and the sea and the land and the spirit that exists. So I said, okay, I think what I'm going to do is, in my first draft, I'm going to put a cap of 200 acres for any resident who is not a bona fide farmer to own land. I thought that was pretty good. The Carver family in Haysbrook, we had 3 little farms, it was 180 acres. Supported the family. So anyway, had it typed up. And then I said, oh, that's pretty tough. So I stroked it out and put 400. So, got that done. And then I said, you know, what am I trying to do here? Am I trying to be a lightning rod? Am I trying to take away from what I was supposed to do here about limits and different things? I said, yeah, I think perhaps I am. I think I'm trying to stand in a soapbox. But maybe the proper time for that soapbox is for down the road for other people to carry on the discussion, to do certain things. So I consulted somebody, and it isn't JP, I consulted somebody who I regard very well in this province about history and land and so forth. And I said, what am I doing here? He said, Horace, I know where you're coming from, but all you're doing is you're just throwing away most of your other report. This is the only issue that people are going to be talking about, and you haven't done the necessary prep work to have the public receive this type of conversation. Well, I disagree slightly with the last. This person didn't come to the meetings, but I tried. I tried in 15 meetings in this province to get people to ask the question, how much land is enough even for island residents? And quite frankly, the differing points of view were not interested in that. They were interested in their respective positions of whether the limits should be raised, the limits maintained, or whatever the case may be. Because I used to have the Globe and Mail, I think I still have it, that 3 wealthy families sold condos in New York for $70, $80, $90 million. And I said, well, look, that's a lot of money. You come to Prince Edward Island, you go to the University of Prince Edward Island for 6 months, you become a resident, you can buy an awful lot of land for $200 million. Okay? But anyway, and at least one or more of the people in the audience here today would tell me, yes, Horace, that was then, but if you were doing the commission hearing today, you'd have different responses. Well, that may be, but I wrote the report 7 years ago. Yes, I know that the government, Wade McLaughlin, the former government, changed some things pertaining to definition of residency, so we got away from 6 months. Within 12 months now we're talking about Canadian citizenship, having a bona fide home here and living here for 12 months of the previous 24. Okay, I understand that. But if we think for one moment that we will be protected in this province by other Canadian citizens when it comes to our lands, dream on. The protection of land in this province is going to be centered in this building and by you folks following the direction that you feel appropriate as members of the elected people. I'm sorry, it's a long answer. I'll do better the next time. Maybe.
Thank you, Chair. The topic of land limits is something I'm particularly interested in, and you speak to the fact that historically your family was able to operate several farms on a less than 200-acre parcel. Mm-hmm. Farming has changed dramatically
since then. It has.
I would love to know, in your research to prepare this report, did you find any evidence that having access to larger parcels of land would make farming more economically viable?
That was probably one of the most difficult questions, and the one or two questions that I was most apprehensive of getting this morning.
You're welcome.
If you read the report in the early sections, it talks about topics that I am prepared to admit that I do not totally understand the scientific aspects of, about sustainability of soils and certain levels and being fertile and iron. I'm prepared to acknowledge that very upfront, Ms. Lund. But in regards, like, I'm going to come around a little bit, and maybe you think I'm not answering the question, but I really am to the best of my ability. One of the things that shocked me more than anything else was to find out 7 years ago how poor crop rotation methods were being honored in this particular province. We have a crop rotation act that was great fanfare about when it was proclaimed. I'm not so sure how effective it's been. And it was at the Montague meeting that the executive director of the Federation of Agriculture stood up, and later Deputy Minister of Agriculture, stood up and said, well, crop rotation in this province, I would say, is honored by 75% of the people. Well, when I was going to that one-room school in Hazelbrook, I thought 75% was pretty good on the test. But that night as I was driving alone back from Montague to Charlottetown, I said, 75% crop rotation? It should be close to 100. Who are the people doing the crop rotation? They're farmers. Who are the people that need good land? farmers. What's going on here? And it was because of that reason, plus another problem that I have, and I haven't forgotten your question, but I got to do it this way, is that I recommended that this double counting in and out was going to cease in certain regards. Why was it going to cease, in my opinion? Well, I know there are people who disagree with it here today. I just couldn't accept logically that if I had 100 acres and I lease it in, I have to count it. But if I lease it out, I couldn't deduct it. I just don't understand that. It's just like Iraq used to a long time ago, that if you owned 100 acres, if the chair and I owned 100 acres, depending upon the nature of the ownership, that instead of saying the chair has 50 acres and I have 50, they say he has 100 and I have 100. Well, I'm saying, well, let's go out and see if we can multiply some more land and we can sell a whole bunch of stuff here, eh? Like some of this stuff, and I know people disagree with me in the double counting, but I had to do what I thought was right. And it made no sense to me that I have to count it when I have it coming in, and when it goes out, I can't deduct it. But we put some limits on that. Up to so many acres you could do that of your arable land. However, the other thing we did is this. I made that particular recommendation that it was only going to exist for 6 years. And why did I do that? Well, I said if farmers are so keen on having the double counting out and so forth, and I even got some other people to agree with that position for, I think, at the Preamble meeting, for example. Let's test this. What's a normal crop rotation? 3 years. 3 plus 3 equals 6. Okay? So then we put a sunset clause. And why did I put a sunset clause in it? I put a sunset clause in it so that if government followed that, which they did, it meant that after 6 years and farmers have the opportunity to indicate to the powers that be that some good progress has been made here, then this will probably be extended. Okay? Amazing how time goes by. 6 years expires in December of 2020. Guess what one of the topics this House is going to be talking about in the spring session or in the fall session? Double counting, in and out. Okay? So then when it comes to the acreage, I know that some people are of the point of view that I opened the gates wider. And I get, not by the people that make that comment, but I get annoyed sometimes by individuals that try to indicate what the land limits in this province are. And what they do is they skip from the first statement down to the bottom without talking the rationalization through. The land laws limits in this province are 3,000 acres for a corporation, arable land, 1,000 acres for a resident, arable land, and then it goes on to talk about that if you have non-arable land, then you have a certain exemption, 400 for an individual and 1,200 acres for a corporation. Why did I come up with that? Because the regulations that were put in place by the former government were not being used. People in the farming community didn't trust the people in government to process the paperwork. They didn't like them coming on their properties and everything like this. Also, as much as I have gotten credit or blame for doing the arable and non-arable thing, I'm not the first person to come up with this. And in the early 90s, no, I'm sorry, that's not right. In 1998, that wonderful committee of this House, the Legislative Committee, they recommended arable land. The late Judge Ralph Thompson, a friend of mine, he recommended the same thing in 2009. And I thought the time had come to let's just address that particular issue. Do we want, as I said to a person in the Preamble meeting, do you want farming to take place in environmentally sensitive lands? And the person said no. So that's how it happened in that particular regard, okay? So am I coming anyways close to getting your original question done?
Lynn?
Thank you, Chair. So I absolutely appreciate where you're going with this, and I understand the need to define the difference between arable land and non-arable land.
Yes.
But there's a push by some individuals to increase the amount of land that we allow, particularly because potato farming on Prince Edward Island would give you one of the lowest returns, if not the lowest return on profit margins in the country. So the argument being put forward is that by increasing the amount of land that potato farms would have access to, that those farmers could expect to see a better return on their investment. I'm wondering if during your research you found any evidence to suggest that would be the case.
Well, the answer to that, Ms. Lund, is recommendation 4, which you probably have in front of you. That before any future increase to the arable aggregate land holdings is considered, government and the agricultural community must commit to the following actions: report satisfactory progress to the public. Through corroborative research, identify barriers to profitability and quantify the relationship, if any, between farm size and profitability. Improve compliance with the Agricultural Crop Rotation Act, improve soil quality, reduce losses from soil erosion, and evaluate report on the potential impact on rural communities of further consolidation. I am then, and even more so now, gravely concerned about the impact of rural communities in regards large corporations and lots of land consolidation. On the scientific components, I regard myself as in the arts category as opposed to science. And I believe that there are others far better than I am. But if there are people out there that feel that land limits need to be increased, if I was advising them on how to make that argument, I would come forth with a whole bunch of data and statistics to back that up about what you're saying, some people are saying. But I did not dwell on that. I simply tossed it out there as a guide or as a beacon for future people to look and discuss about.
Lynn?
Thank you, Chair. Since the Lands Protection Act has come into play, have we seen an improvement in environmental health and well-being for the soil and water?
I guess I'll answer it this way. I thank God that the leadership was present in 1982 to have the Lands Protection Act enacted, because I do not know what this province and rural Prince Edward Island would look like today if we did not have the Lands Protection Act, even with its alleged weaknesses or somewhat. So I look at the mandate of this committee and I just say, oh my heavens above, I never served on a committee like that. It's unbelievable. And I should have gotten this in earlier. I was invited, I think in 2014 or 2015, to appear in the winter twice to talk about my report. Both were stormed out. And somewhere along the line, the invitation never appeared again. There are serious issues, whether deep water wells or a whole bunch of other things that need to be addressed. And everything cannot be about the almighty dollar, but we do need to look upon dollars as a potential friend to do things that I recommended in my report about land acquisition that haven't happened. I'm not even sure they've been thought of. But I don't feel qualified to answer that technical aspect of environmental so forth. I think I know this, that I hear more people talking about environment. It's just like this building that we are sitting in here today. There was a time in which heritage and business didn't seem to work together. Okay? I was Minister of Attorney General in the Angus MacLean government. He also told me I was going to be Minister of Public Works for a year. So I called my wife up and I said, we're to be at the Government House tomorrow morning, new cabinet sworn in, and I'm Attorney General and Minister of Public Works. She said, what does Public Works mean? Oh, I said, it's going to be fun. She said, what do you mean it's going to be fun? I says, we're responsible for Government House. And I said, you know that old law courts building that's half burned downtown? That a former government put an old roof on for $10,000? I said, I'm only here for a year, but we're going to restore that place. Yeah, it took some fighting. There was a member of the opposition who's no longer in public life, that every time he stood up in the legislature referred to the Coles building here as Carver's Folly. Quite frankly, I didn't care. But anyway, I had the backing of Premier MacLean because this place was too valuable. And you know, I think there was even talk here about demolishing this place. Yes, it cost $1 million plus. Yes, I retained David Bergman and Old Hammerman to be the architects. But apparently I did it differently. Instead of hiring an architect and letting them do what they want to do, I said that all these architects who wanted to apply had to submit their work and tell me what they were going to do. So I liked this fellow's work down Century 20 Place in Paulin Street. Told him he could do whatever he wanted except the wood arches and inside the building to make it modern and functional, but he better not touch the exterior. And adding extra floors, you could do so, but the windows weren't to be affected, so that's why the windows look the way they are. And one day I was up walking around the construction site and I bumped into Irene Rogers and Kathy Hennessy, and they said, Horace, is there going to be a town clock in this place? I said, oh, was there a town clock? There was one time, I went back and told the deputy minister, who was twice my age, I said, I don't know if they had a town clock or not, but you're putting a darn town clock in that place because I can't withstand fighting Irene Rogers and Kathy Hennessy. So sometimes we have to spend money in order to do things, and I just apologize, Ms. Lund, I don't know the technical answers, but I had the feeling that just like heritage and business improved and working together, that environmentalists and business people are now starting to see the opportunities together. There are wonderful opportunities in a small jurisdiction like this for different points of view to work together to have the benefit for all, as long as we don't get so opinionated that we fail to listen to other point of view. Sorry.
Lynn?
Thank you, Chair. You speaking your opening to the report about the value of the top 10 inches of our soil and how that is arguably the most valuable resource we have, and I would agree with that. One of the weaknesses your report identifies under the Lands Protection Act is that environmental health and well-being indicators, including soil and water, have declined since the Act came into force. So I guess I will just ask one final question before I let you go over to someone else, Chair. You had indicated that there are a number of recommendations that have been made that have not been invested in. I'm wondering if you could highlight them for the
Absolutely. I reread the media report after the report was made public in November 2013 last night. And I said that I was enthusiastic because I had assurances from government that many things were going to happen. Then at the premier of the day, he's quoted in the paper saying, and I really perhaps didn't appreciate it until I reread it last night, the main recommendations we're going to put in, but the ones that cost money, we're going to think about it some more. Okay? So what is it that I think should have happened? We have public land mass in this province around 6.9 or 7% public lands. I am not aware of any allocation of provincial revenues in the past number of years to buy additional lands. Okay? And that, as a lawyer, I can tell you that every so often I have someone that comes in to my office, and guess what they want to make a will. But you know what they're looking for? Beneficiaries. There are people who have money who don't have family, or if they do, they want to do a whole bunch of good things before they leave this earth. But I can tell you one thing, not a single one of those individuals wants to leave government leave money to any provincial government. But they would leave money to the Nature Conservatory of Canada. And we ought to be thankful that that organizations, they would leave money to the Island Nature Trust. Okay. They would leave money to the Lucy Maud Montgomery Trust. And I recommend in my report a couple of things. One is we establish an Island Landscape View Trust. We need to be out there and allocating dollars towards that to buy sensitive lands with views and vistas and so forth. We need to be doing that. And what's even worse about this, folks, we haven't even provided a vehicle to allow people that want to give money to do it, which is a disgrace. When's the last time a new provincial park has been created in Prince Edward Island? I give my hat off to Lawrence Macaulay for the leadership that he has shown in the expansion of the park up at Greenwich. Now, there's some more that can happen. Blooming Point can be expanded, and this and that and everything else. But look at my maps in here, in the west and the east of this province, the amount of non-resident ownership. We need to be buying some lands. One can say, well, maybe the farmers want the land. Well, maybe they do. Maybe we can be smart enough to work a deal with the farmer, that we can buy it together. They give up developmental rights. We retain vistas along the seaside and mountain views. They have farming rights and all of that type of situation. But those things are not happening. The other thing, and I regret that my good friend, the Minister of Finance, is not here today, but the provincial treasury of this province has for a significant period of time, especially since the introduction of the land transfer tax in 2005, reaping millions and millions of dollars in land transfer fees, and a significant amount of dollars in IRAC fees for the processing of non-resident and corporate fees. If you're a corporation with island residents, the shareholders, you don't have to pay the fee. And all of those monies, they go one place, to the General Consolidated Fund of this province. And I have said in my report that half of the fees for IRAC should be going to Landscape Trust to buy things, that a certain percentage, modest of 5%, I should have said 25%, of the land transfer fees should be buying. Just think about it, a land transfer tax. And why is the tax paid? Because property is being transferred from here to here. Well, wouldn't you think that a noble goal of some of that revenue would be to buy public lands, increase the expansion of public lands, that we all could enjoy it? No, hasn't happened. And there are significant fees. And when you have large apartment buildings being sold in this province and outside of residents, and their fees have to be paid to IRAC or land trust, there's lots of money coming in those resources. And it's a missed opportunity. It's a missed opportunity because there are people in this province I know would be prepared to sit in advisory boards to help and do certain things in that particular regard. I said to you, Chair, a while ago that I want you to remind me about the registry office, and I have sort of mentioned the registry office now, so I'm a little reminded of it, is that, and this is not the Minister of Finance's fault. This has been an attitude and a bureaucracy, in my opinion, has existed for some time. When I was Attorney General, the land registry offices in this province were under the direction and responsibility of the Attorney General. At some point in time, in the 80s, late 80s, they were transferred from land and law matters over to revenue. We need to spend some bucks in the land registry office in this province. You guys need to take a tour of the place sometime. We need to have our books properly cared for. We need to find out if there are better ways of doing certain things. I've had this discussion now with several governments at certain levels. I have yet to have it with my friend, the Minister of Finance. But land's important. But how we deal with our records and so forth is also important.
Peter?
Thank you, Chair. I want to start out, Mr. Carver, by thanking you for being here today, and the passion and the pride that you have expressed in the work that you've done during your life is very evident. And I found the presentation you've given thus far to be very moving and very compelling, and I thank you for that. I feel like I've had a crash course in law school. I feel like...
maybe history.
Yes, in island history, and also in political wisdom, and I appreciate everything you've said. I'm grateful you're here today to speak publicly for the first time since your report was released in 2013. I'm also very grateful, and you spoke about this in your opening remarks, that you were there back in 1980 and 1981 when PEI argued successfully, of course, that our province had to retain that right and the legal ability to limit and control land ownership. And as you rightly point out, had we not won that argument, we would not be sitting here today. There would be no Lands Protection Act. So that really needs to be iterated and reiterated. I remember well the meeting in Krakow. Where I believe that was the first time we had ever met, actually.
It was.
And I did a presentation with our dear friend and a late friend, Harry Backlow. And Harry, of course, was also extremely concerned about land use and land ownership here in our province. You said something in your opening remarks, and it was related to the Supreme Court of Canada, where, and I think you quoted them as saying, the law is important, but conventions are also important. And I'm going to go back to something that Ms. Lund mentioned in her first question about the spirit and intent of the Lands Protection Act. Do you feel, I mean, and the purpose of the Act, the bit that you read out from page 9 of your report, was added later. That was in 1998 that was added to the Lands Protection Act. But it's very clear what the spirit and the intent of the Act is. And given the clarity of that intent, do you feel that government has the right, some might even say government has the obligation, to uphold that spirit and intent when certain actions are clearly designed to circumvent the law as it exists?
Well, great question, Dr. Beffenbaker. Sometimes the answer is a little longer. Let me simply say this. When I was quoting the Supreme Court of Canada, I think I used the word political in front of convention, because that, in that particular context, it's important to understand that. I do fully intend to answer that question. I believe that there is power in the Lands Protection Act for the minister responsible, the Lands Protection Act. And I forget now, we have two ministers. We have the Minister of Agriculture and Land, and then I believe perhaps the technical minister responsible might be the Minister of Education. I'm not sure. It's a division there that I just never quite understood, and I think it's worthy of getting rid of the Minister of Education and just dealing with the Minister of Agriculture and Land. I have followed with interest some of the discussions that took place here before Christmas and things that were making the media and so forth. And I believe that it's essential that the minister, let's call him the Minister of Agriculture and Land, say he's the person, that he feels that he has the authority to compel answers to questions such as, who owns the land? And if the minister feels that he doesn't have the legal authority to ask who owns the land, then give him the authority to get the answers that he needs. Where would a logical place be to look for the answers to those questions? Well, it apparently, according to the media and discussions in this House, IRAC are looking and doing certain things, information. but can they collect and also remit information that can be made public by the Minister of Agriculture and Land? The wonderful thing about having more than one lawyer, and I'm not a lawyer today, I am here as a commissioner, is that sometimes you get different points of view. Okay? I always felt that when that statute was drafted in 1981 and 82, that the government, the minister, had the authority to deem certain situations to be as one. Now we can nitpick at that and say it should be this word or that word. Okay, fine and dandy. If something isn't as firm as it needs to be, guess what? Put the firmness in there. If we make the mistake the first time, do it the second time. Okay? Because there will always be, and that's the way our society is. It's the way our democratic society is that people have the right to do things that are legal, provided they don't do certain things to offend their neighbors and so forth. That's a general statement that needs lots of qualifications to it. But the land, as I say in my report, is more than just who owns it according to the deed. It is a larger body of the public trust. Okay? And so therefore, if the Minister of Agriculture was here, the question that I would ask him, not necessarily to have him answered, do you feel that you had the necessary authority to find out who owns certain parcels of land in regards to corporation and who the shareholders are? And if you don't, then I would ask my colleagues to give it to me. Okay? If there ever was a house, since I entered politics, that is capable of achieving things along the lines that Don Wilson says, it's this house. I look at the government house leader, position I had. I got along with my colleagues, but I have a feeling you get along better. Okay? And I'm going to allude to something else I said earlier. The composition of this house is not always going to last. In fact, I have a personal prediction what the next house is going to look like. And some people are sitting in the current house, shouldn't give up their day jobs.
Name names.
I think your part-time fishing occupation's safe. But it's an opportunity, okay, to work together to do certain things. And yes, one can argue that there's been a lot of public consultation, but that was 7 years ago. There hasn't been any public consultation since. I suggested that there be a conference in 2014, a doers and thinkers conference composed of farmers and non-farmers. What happened to that? Well, I always sort of thought that maybe the Georgetown conference took over, but I was never invited to the Georgetown conference. But anyway, that's okay. I'm invited today. There was supposed to be a special advisory committee composed of farmers and non-farmers who would make a report and listen to islanders and every 3 years report to the House. My recollection is, this is the first time you've had somebody report to the House on something like this. These issues do not go away. These issues only fester and they create suspicions. Sunlight needs to be exposed on situations. I am not pointing any fingers whatsoever. And I understand how mistakes happen. Why? I happen to be a human being, but I think you guys are too. Okay? For the life of me, I do not understand how a business corporation act in this province could be passed the other year before the election that made it no longer possible to know the shareholders of Prince Edward Island companies. I do not understand. But you have to understand this. I made a decision when I left public life. I was not going to be sitting in the gallery. I think I've been here a total of maybe 3 times in those number of years. I just wasn't. I was either in the game or I was out of the game. And I have had my time. I am interested in what happens in public life. I may read certain things, but I do not read the bills and so forth. I just don't. That is the job of others. And I will say that I am pleased to know that explanatory notes are still accompanying the bills that are submitted here. My suggestion to whatever committee is in charge of the House, that explanatory notes be expanded and to be more detailed than they have. I think of an amendment 5 or 6 years ago on exempting certain types of mortgages. A very significant thing that got passed in this House. And it shouldn't have got passed in this House. But when it did get passed in this House, because all the other parts of the bill more or less were what I had recommended, and the implication was that I had recommended this, I took some individual action to make sure that members of the House knew that that was not the case, and that bill was never proclaimed, and a new bill came forth to have it the way it was supposed to have been. But I did look at the explanatory note, and the explanatory note is deficient. The largest occupation used to be of the government of the House of Commons was lawyers. Well, you know what Christ said about lawyers. But in any event, this place would not work the way it's supposed to work if 27 lawyers sat here. You are here because people want you to be here at a certain point in time, okay? I am also of the opinion that the explanatory notes need to be more detailed. Sure, you can have a deputy minister come with the minister to help explain when a bill is being passed. That's okay. But I believe that in every instance, when bills, particularly of any degree of technicality, come forth, especially when they're amending other bills in which you amend this section, you need to be there with a pair of scissors and seeing what's going on. The Legislative Council should be sitting where the chair is sitting today, every single time. The other thing that needs to happen, we need to adopt the practice in Nova Scotia. This is a practice that I have spoken to one or more of you about on occasion over a period of time. They have the Law Amendments Committee. The Law Amendments Committee deals with public bills. They have another committee that deals with private bills. I looked it up again this morning to make sure I'm correct, and I am, except that I was a little surprised that what they do is all public bills go to the Law Amendments Committee after second reading. For some reason, I thought it was after first reading, but I was wrong. But now, Mr. McEwen, the more I think about it, the more it makes sense. They've gone through it clause by clause, the members, then they go out to the public, and then the committee writes a report and they send it back to the House, and of course they can make changes there. And it's not an instance of where you invite me, but the public invite themselves to appear for every single public bill and also private that exists. And they can do it by written representation. You know, that I believe is an effective way to increase exposure. I know there's been some criticism, perhaps unjustified, that the current House have too many discussions talking about among House leaders without in the public. Well, I can tell you, unless you've got a good relationship with the opposition House leaders, the place doesn't work, okay? Some government House leaders have the opinion they're in control. Well, that's not the way this place works. You have to work together in mutual respect. But I believe that there needs to be looked at the idea of having a Law Amendments Committee that meets every Wednesday morning from 9 o'clock till 12 noon. Any person that they want to can call. They have to call the legislative office and say they're going to appear. And I would say that I would be surprised if that doesn't improve quality of legislation in this House. At least it'll give members more comfort that there's been more exposure. How are we doing with the answer, Dr. Devon?
Peter?
I'll just ask one more question, Chair. I'm going to bring us back to the Lands Protection Act, much as I appreciate your comments on how things are working here and in
Sure.
many respects. I'm really glad you invoked Frank Sinatra in your earlier comments, and of course the first line of "I Did It My Way" is "Start spreading the news." And I'm really glad that you came forward and told us what the 30th recommendation may have been, because that's a very, very important topic and one that nobody has talked about within the walls of this legislature. So I'm sure that's going to spark a lot of debate.
I'm sure
afterwards.
too.
I appreciate that. Some news that we're not so good at spreading is reporting of land holdings. And I know in your report, I think it was recommendation number 13, that there be an annual report made by IRAC on land holdings. You also mentioned in your report between 2004 and 2014, the year when, or the last year, or 2011, I can't remember. Anyway, the last year that you had access to those reports, nothing had come out. As far as I know, we have still not had any reporting. How can we be better at spreading the news and allowing islanders to know who holds what land?
Well, I think any way you want to cut it, Dr. Devon Baker, the legislature's in control. And if you're not getting the answers from the people you want to get the answers, then you just issue a directive to have them appear, and they will appear. And if you don't like what you're hearing, amend the legislation and set deadlines, resolutions, and so forth. You folks have the power and you have the authority. And if you fail to use it, at some point in time, the issue, with the greatest respect to you, and I do have a lot of respect for you, it no longer becomes somebody else not doing their job. It becomes closer to home not doing our jobs. And I was surprised that at that time when I wrote the report, how so much hadn't happened and so forth and so on. I do not know how the operation really works at IRAC. You don't have to be too astute to read my report and see that I took a few swings at that organization. And in my several dealings I had with them since, it seems to have improved, and I have no reason to have farmers talk to me these days about this, but I know when I was doing the report, farmers were not pleased the way they felt they were treated at the time. But it would seem to me that one of the key questions that needs to be addressed, and I don't know the answer. People think lawyers provide answers. Sometimes we just provide questions. Is, does IRAC have the authority to find out who the shareholders are down the line in respect to corporations that own land in Prince Edward Island? If they have that authority, then they should be able to answer requests from the minister to give it to the minister. If they don't have that authority, political decisions have to be made to give them that authority. And we have island corporations incorporated in PI. We have corporations in New Brunswick. They have different rules and regulations. We have federal incorporations, different rules and regulations. I'm not a corporate lawyer. I'm just not. But I know a little bit about land. And when you buy land in Prince Edward Island, you have to fill out an affidavit either by the purchaser or by the lawyer indicating how much the land was paid for and who's selling it and everything this. Well, and yes, I know, according to the media, what happened last fall. Share of transfers, they bought assets, including land and so forth. Well, I was in the House when the affidavit of valuation was introduced a long time ago. Maybe there needs to be some other different types of documents and affidavits introduced. This province still controls land. It still controls the land registry system. And maybe what you have to do is that if people transfer or control in a company, even among residents to residents, that before that becomes effective, that there has to be some other documentation filed forthwith or whatever with corporate. I don't know the answer to it. I just know that you folks should not be feeling as if you have no options and choices what to do. Because if you feel that way, then something is wrong with where we're at. And, sorry.
Thank you. Michelle,
Thank you, Chair. Thank you so much for coming and presenting to us today. I think that it is extremely valuable for Islanders to hear from you. I look at it as being respectful to Islanders, given how many contributed to the public engagements, how many people took the time to write reports, to submit them to you, and how much time you took to review each and every one of those. So I thank you for sharing what you learned and for walking us through your report. So I appreciate that. And as a new member of this assembly, with not a lot of experience at all around, what I'm responsible for, I've taken the opportunity to listen to some very concerned, wise people who have been able to provide me with a lot of information. So one thing I'd like to talk about is, first of all, farmers. And when I have a farmer that sits down across the table from me that is stressed visibly in wanting to discuss what they know is outside of what the Lands Protection Act was set out to do, and a lot of farmers feel like they can't speak out because of what will happen to them if they voice it publicly, or if they talk about land transfers that they are aware of. And there has been talk, the Premier has agreed to do it, to put in a provincial ombudsperson's office. We talked about it in our platform to have it as an independent provincial ombudsperson. I did have a farmer express to me, how do I have the conversation where I'm not publicly named, so that there aren't any repercussions to that farmer. So I'd just like, Horace, if you could walk us through, do you think providing farmers the opportunity to express their concerns about land ownership to an ombudsperson would embolden them to speak out against excessive land ownership and other agricultural practices that are contrary to our interests?
I have never considered that as an option. I have never been in favor of an ombudsman because I believe we have 27 ombudsmen in this province. I believe that it's another unnecessary level of bureaucracy, that one of the benefits of this House is that you're all acting in that particular capacity. One of the reasons why I like that you do clause by clause in the committee of the whole, one of the reasons why I like you do your estimates line by line here, is because it's out in front. I can see where the role of an ombudsman is needed in this particular province in certain regards. I don't see it as fulfilling any valuable role in respect to the Lands Protection Act. And having said that, sometimes when I would give a legal opinion, I would sign off and say, notwithstanding the foregoing, it's quite possible that I'm wrong in this opinion.
Thank you.
Michelle.
I appreciate that. And I would agree that, when Islanders do come and talk to their MLAs, it's on a confidential basis. I had the opportunity to speak to a number of processors recently, and one processor identified a very big difference between their operating model and, for instance, a U.S. operating model. And the difference between that was this processor doesn't grow what they process. And he referred to the U.S. version as being, when they grow what they process, it allows them to control the price. So if the price has gotten too high, then they can just say, well, I don't need your product, I'm just going to process my own until the price comes down. Processor's not defined in the Lands Protection Act, and I'm just wondering your thoughts on whether there would be an opportunity. What do you think about defining a processor in the Lands Protection Act, and and the impacts to farmers around having growers, having processors also being growers?
Well, I guess I'll answer that in the eyes of 1980. But the danger with that is that have things changed, in which manner have they changed? The 3,000 acre limit at that particular point in time was to do a few things. It was to restrict what was perceived as increased corporate vertical farming and all that type of stuff. 3,000 acres seemed a lot of acres at the time, and so forth. And it was a lot of acres at the time, and 1,000 was a lot of acres. I have no scientific basis for making this statement, except I guess that I can understand where it is okay for a processor to also do some growing. How much the sum is, I don't know. I believe that the sum can get so large that it presents a significant danger to the viability of the larger public good in the agricultural community. And that would be a concern that I certainly would have. But that's just a comment that another question I didn't expect today. Processor definition.
There's so much that we can talk about around the Lands Protection Act. And so we had IRAC in to speak on the Lands Protection Act in November, I think it was the end, November 29th, I believe. My memory serves me correct, was when they came in to speak. And one of the questions that I did ask them was, is there anybody who's over their land ownership acreage? And the answer was not to their knowledge, no. So there is public perception out there, though, that absolutely there is. And I'm wondering, in your opinion, why do islanders have that perception if the body that is supposed to have the answer says no? But islanders are pointing towards examples in which there is.
Well, if I understand the question, you're asking me to speculate why a whole bunch of people have an opinion that is contrary to what IRAC says. I'm not sure that I feel qualified to answer, except that islanders, as I say in my report, people would stop me on the street, literally, and talk about the report, individuals who I didn't even know when I was doing the consultation. And they would say, Mr. Carver, you know the island history. You know islanders are passionate about their land. Well, I think that's part of it. I think the other part of it is that, well, sometimes some islanders are rather interested in what happens in other people's affairs. But the way to deal with it, because the issue is so important, Ms. Beaton, is that make sure that the body or bodies that have the legal entitlement to information get the legal information, and if IRAC, to repeat myself, feels they can't get the information, and even if they get it, are without liberty to make it public to the minister who will make it public to the public, then give them the authority to do so. I know enough that when I was in public life and as a lawyer, before the significant changes happened in healthcare and about nursing home care, there was more misinformation in the countryside than any other conceivable matter. Everybody always had an example. A lot of the examples were just outright wrong. But the way I see it in something like this, does IRAC have the authority to get the information they're supposed to get? If they don't, give it to them. Will they give the information to the minister? Will the minister then make it public? That's the way I see it.
Thank you. And I just, two more questions if that's
Michelle?
okay. Oh my goodness.
Well, when you're
So-
thinking, okay, go ahead.
Section 15 of the Act gives the minister the authority to request an investigation.
Yes.
And I'm not necessarily asking you this question as you're here as a commissioner, but I guess it might even be drawing on your day job, I guess, as a lawyer. If you were to speculate on the length of time that it takes to do an investigation, I guess what I'm asking is, should the Lands Protection Act have a length of time associated to how long it should take to do that investigation, as really it's the public that wants to know. So what is, should there be a time length associated to the Lands Protection Act when it comes to investigations?
Well, if it's an issue, then make it a non-issue by giving them a certain amount of time to deal with it. The way I look at it is that if something's a problem, solve the problem. Increase the public confidence in this place, increase the public confidence in the whole statute and what's going on out there. One of the things that I hope we have an opportunity to talk about this morning, maybe the chair will give us a few extra minutes, is land banking. Okay? I was so frustrated in the preparation of my report when I feel I failed in a certain regard in my report. Because one of the things that I intended to do when Premier Giz told me that he had to apply for the position when I was appointed. I told Premier Giz, Robert Giz, I intended to bring different points of view, particularly in the agricultural farming community, the two main organizations, together and come up. Well, I failed, but I tried. And, but I do think that one of the things I did achieve was that at the end of the day, I did have the respect of both organizations and other individuals who held different points of view. And that's why I was the guest speaker at the NFU, I believe it was in April of 2013. They wanted me to come earlier, but we had family commitments out west, and I said to Edith Ling, who's here today, you change your annual meeting, I'll come, okay? And so at midnight the night before, I threw away what I was going to say, and what you see there, those 10 shared values, I wrote them at 1 o'clock in the morning in a little bit of paper. And that was my speech to that organization. And later on, a leader in the agriculture community said to me, Horace, they're just motherhood issues. I said, well, guess where we have to start? When two farm organizations can't seem to listen and talk to each other in certain points. And they're there. They are worth reading again, folks. They're not overly complex. They're basic. And probably my biggest disappointment, and I misread the political waters completely. The most certain thing that I thought was going to be accepted by the government of the day in my report was they were going to support land banking. Probably based upon the LDC model which I was advocating and so forth. And the Giz government, even either in the throne speech or a budget speech, had indicated they were in favor of it. Both organizations were in favor of it. Guess what happened? Politicians didn't rule the day, but some bureaucratic points of view carried the day. We need to have land banking in this province. We need to help young farmers. We need to take monies out of the public purse. And we need to buy land. We need to have leases. We need to have stipulations about the quality of the soil and so forth. Is it going to take 30 million, 40 million, 50 million? I don't know. And quite frankly, why does it make much difference? As I understand it, we're borrowing dollars these days for next to no rate of interest. Okay? at the Kensington meeting, the Minister of Finance had just announced that it consolidated some funds, and I think they borrowed $42 million for 1% interest or 0% interest in this local wit. Not to be, and this is one of the things I so enjoyed with the people, is they could see things. It's like Angus MacLean used to tell me as I was sitting there where Mr. Howard is and the Premier was sitting here. The people out in the countryside, they get it. They understand the common sense. So you have to be careful what you say in here because it's read differently in the kitchens of rural Prince Edward Island. Anyway, this farmer comes up to me, an old timer. He says, Mr. Carver, if the Minister of Finance, and he was the Minister of Finance represented that area, is borrowing $40 or $41 million at 0% interest or 1% interest, why won't he get a little bit more and lend me and my colleagues a little bit at the same rate of interest? Seems common sense to me. And one can argue that, oh, the land, this will happen and we won't be able to go down quality. No! The government has the ownership of the land. They control the leases. They can control different aspects of this. And sure, they have X amount of millions of dollars have gone out to buy the land, but if I understand anything about accounting, is that that is a debit, but on the credit side, you have land that has increased in value recently. So why aren't we doing it? Past due.
Okay.
Michelle?
So the minister has announced that he's working on the Lands Protection Act 2.0, and that that should be coming forward in the spring. Given your knowledge and what's in the report, and I understand I'm chair of the PAC committee, so
You're chair of the what?
I'm chair of the Public Accounts Committee, and
How are you?
And so I take great pleasure going through all the Auditor General reports and seeing the recommendations that were made and following up on them, because I think that...
Have you been able to pick up over the last number of years in the reports any possibility of having saved some dollars in some of those departments that you could use to fund a landscape trust?
Well, we will
Keep looking.
keep looking, yes. But one of the things that I think is important is not putting a report on a shelf and making sure that when it is timely, that you're going through those reports and ensuring that transparency is there, accountability is present. So given what you've learned and your background, we have a department that is embarking on writing legislation. If you had the opportunity to give advice to those lawyers and policymakers that may, if you had that young grasshopper kind of opportunity, what would you want them to really understand and really know as they go through making updates to this legislation that could be looking out for the next 20 to 30 years?
The three most brilliant, astute politicians I met in this country, all of them were non-lawyers. One of them is Angus MacLean, of course. He made me a better lawyer, and he made me a better politician. When I was in cabinet, I used to be petrified because I was government house leader, responsible for all the legislation went through the house. He had a little statutory instruments committee. He was head of the statutory instruments committee during the Diefenbaker cabinet years, in which every piece of law that was proposed, every piece of legislation went through his committee before it ever went to cabinet. In the Premier MacLean's government, I was on that committee. He was the chair. There was another cabinet minister. Everything went through. The civil servants had to come in and they had to justify, the minister had to justify what it was. Then it went to the Conservative caucus. And then it went here. And then it might go to committee. And his attitude was very simple. We are here to improve the legislation. The Conservative Party does not have a monopoly on brains and all the best answers. We work together collegiately across the house to see what we can produce, okay? And I know that there's a feeling that perhaps enough public consultation has happened and this type of stuff. Well, what we want to achieve in whatever Lands Protection Act 2.0 is, I never quite understand these things, 2.0s, I'm not sure what it means, but anyway, it seems to be a bit of the lingo, is that whatever happens, if it does not have sufficient public support with good explanation to the public, it will become law, and it will lack what I call the moral authority to do what it's trying to do. Okay? It ought to be possible to deal with the extension on the leasing in and leasing out stuff. That should be able to be dealt with effectively. I'm sure you could all agree upon that, even if you just extend a brief period of time. But whatever comes up as being proposed, after you see it, you'll know what needs to happen. And if people are not given the opportunity to comment and participate on it whatsoever, that just lacks, right off the bat, the necessary political morale authority to take care of it. And in my opinion, you don't need too many lawyers. You need some good policy thinkers. You need to understand how this is going to work. And I threw it out before. There wasn't really any comment except nodding the heads, which I appreciate. Is that I'm not a corporate lawyer, but there are corporate lawyers available, and we need not feel as if that whatever happened last spring, last fall, whether it was legal at that time or didn't cover all those situations, is a total sense of despair. We do not need to feel in a state of despair. We need to realize that in every significant thing that has happened in this province in the past 30 years when it comes to the Land Protection Act, and we haven't talked about all of those things, every time that there has been a public outcry, every time that governments have been forced to act, and some people have accused us of acting too late or whatever, every single time those opportunities have been seized upon by different premiers. For example, Premier Giz, first Premier Giz, he retained me as a lawyer for the government to assist council to make certain recommendations in the Lands Protection Act at the time. And what happened is, up to that point in time, farm corporations in Prince Edward Island did not need to apply to IRAC to get approval under the Lands Protection Act, even if they're in PI. But as a result of events that happened in the early 90s and my representations to him as his lawyer, as Premier, changes were made so that all corporations in Prince Edward Island needed to apply. Back to my main point. Every time that things have happened in which there's an outcry, certain things are not satisfied with what the way it should be, in every instance that I can recall is, I think I'm correct in that, improvements and significant improvements have been made, sometimes more strict, sometimes tighter, but if that's the way it has to be, then that's the way it is going to be in a free and democratic society. Got on a little platform there, didn't I?
That's all right. That's great. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Robert?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, Mr. Carver, I've been in pretty close, keen eye on this whole subject of land for many years, and as you mentioned earlier, I had attended some of the reports earlier, and I have to admit I also have followed your career for quite some time from way back. That sort of dates me a little bit, but my father was also involved in politics around the same era.
We were here at the same time.
Yeah, so from that perspective, but we've had a lot of questions just about land and ownership and things of that issues, but I have 3 or 4 questions here. But one of the questions that, you know, I kind of keep a pretty close eye on, and you made the statement that land should never be a commodity. And I'll say to a certain degree it's not a commodity per se. It's not like oats or barley or potatoes, but it does have a value. And farmers in Prince Edward Island, we compete in a global marketplace today, whether it's potatoes or grain or soybeans, whatnot. And these farmers are competing against other farmers in other jurisdictions. And one of the issues I look at is the value of that land. And so that value plays a key role in the equity that farmers have in their operations. And that equity that they establish in their land, and hopefully most farmers are doing whatever they can to increase that value all the time by doing the proper crop rotations and things of that nature. But they take that equity and they borrow upon that to do further investments in improving their land or equipment to be more efficient and things of that nature. And obviously, any time that we're putting in restrictions on land ownership and land purchases and things like that, that is going to impact the value on land to a certain degree and competing with other places. And I do believe that we do need some sense of restriction. I mean, I don't think it should ever be a free-for-all. But in your opinion, what is there that, or what are your pieces of advice that you can do to retain some sense of that value on land for farmers who use that as, like I say, it's a pretty valuable asset to them and their ability to continue on in the farming practices?
Well, Mr. Henderson, it's a very practical question. It's a very practical observation. I have seen radical changes in the 7 years since I wrote the report. Okay. As I said earlier, at that time, I think land valuations were generally $2,500, $3,500 all around the Charlottetown area. Now, and perhaps they've been moving towards Prince County. You're getting $6,000, $7,000 per acre. One of my best friends, met the first day in law school, son of a farmer in Ontario, now retired. He and his wife come down about every year, and he follows the CBC Compass News all the time. He said, Horace, if you had 100 acres of land where I come from in the farming belt up there, and you put a price tag at the front of the gate, $20,000 an acre, he said, within half an hour, you wouldn't be able to see the end of the line. So that's the type of value that's coming here. I'm not in any way taking away from the sincerity and import of your question, because I'm not. But if anybody in this province who wants to get into farming, and we want to pass on this honorable generation of farming, thinks that they can do so in the free marketplace without some restrictions on whatever, they are just crazy. I know I've quoted Angus MacLean so much, but when JP came to work for me, we'd never met. Actually, he says we met before, but I forgot him. But in any event, I said, you want to know how I think? Here's Angus MacLean's book, Making It Home. We're cut from the same cloth. Angus used to say that if you believe in the greed of the corporate jungle and you have no controls on it, watch out, because it can be the ruination of your society. Those are paraphrased, but generally something along those lines. So I know, Mr. Henderson, there are people in this province that think that Iraq and the government are perhaps restricting them in being able to buy land and making it more complicated than they've got to go through. You are looking at it from the point of view of the farmer trying to sell and have the investment, and that's very... But those people that think that they can compete and always win on a free marketplace about buying land are wrong. Because however much money they have, I am convinced there are people close to our shores, as I say in my report, that are prepared to pay way more money than these people have. In regards to the farmers that you're talking about, I think we need to come up with some creative ideas to enable a couple things to happen. One is that if we have farmer A and he has a son or a daughter that want to take over the farm, that one thing is that the son and daughter can buy the farm and not get dinged with land transfer taxes. I write the recommendation in the report. Why should a farmer who wants to pass it on and get some money back have his child have to pay land transfer tax? If they give a gift to it, you wouldn't have to. I'm not saying it happens, but if you gift it to your son or daughter and Christmas comes along and then the son decides to give some money at Christmas time to mom and dad, you get around it. But when laws aren't respected, then people end up doing things they shouldn't do if they're honest men and women. And we need to help people do something like that. And there's some other things I'm sure that can be done. For example, if that farmer says, well, you know, I'm a little uncertain about the marriage of my kids here and everything I think, you know, they say they're going to pay me some money every year, but like I'd like to take a little bit of security on that. Well, why not let them have a bit of a security? I know, and I'm a strong opponent of people taking mortgages on property, say farm debt or something like that, without getting IRAC approval. But I don't see anything wrong with a father or mother getting paid over time and being able to take a mortgage back for part of the property without necessarily going to IRAC. But if that causes a big deal, then let them go to IRAC and not charge them a fee. There has to be some creative ideas to take care of what you're concerned about. And I'm sorry, Robert, if I'm not getting a detailed answer to you, but we need to be concerned about those folks, because normally those folks are anxious about their children or younger people in the community getting into farming. And one of the best ways of doing it is to do what the Land Development Corporation did years ago. They just bought the farmers' land, let them have a house and a couple of acres of land, and they got the money and the government got the land, had the lease and everything else. It's not an insolvable problem, in my opinion.
Rob?
No, and I think, like I say, there's certainly your two components of this. There's the buyers and sellers, and obviously as land goes too high, it gets hard for younger farmers or newer people to purchase. But what we have seen happen here in Prince Edward Island is that we have seen a lot of farmers who have sold land in other countries. I think of the Dutch farmers that have come in here. We've also seen the circumstance where farmers from Ontario have come down here and set up farm practice, and that's a good thing, and they've been great farmers and good stewards of the land in every regard. So we do have to try to find that sense of balance to allow local people to compete also with purchasing those lands against those people that are getting large amounts of equity in their operations in these other jurisdictions. So I say that's one side of it, but it's still the issue I look at, the equity within a farmer's land and how they can use that to improve their land holdings and be competitive in the marketplace. So there has to be some sort of a way to kind of figure that out, I guess.
Absolutely.
You know.
One of the things that's important, let's say they are purchasing or selling to a non-resident, and they've tried locally and they can't happen, and then they, you know, when a person makes an application who's a non-resident of this province to buy land, in my opinion, it's more than filling out the form. The form's not that complicated to fill out. But what it fails to indicate is what's the spirit, what's the purpose behind the people who are non-residents or corporations that want to buy it. They need to set out a detailed model of what they want to see the land, agriculturally involved and all that type of stuff. I think there's some, I think that what you're talking about with land banking could help a lot.
Okay. Just another point you'd made a little earlier there was, you've mentioned in your report, or not your report, when you're doing the hearings back in 2013, there was an individual mentioned about the Crop Rotation Act, or that there was only 75% of the people that are abiding by that. You know, I would have to say that in today's, I would hope that it's 100% abiding by that. If it's a case, it's an enforcement issue that hasn't been done. And I know during my time as sitting in the chair as Minister of Agriculture, we always tried to make sure that if there was any complaints or questions that come in, we followed up on that to determine. And I think there's some cases around the Crop Rotation Act that may be misinterpreted by some people, that at least we're setting out a standard of a 3-year Crop Rotation Act. And if anybody is doing less than that, it has to at least comply with the organic matter that equals that. But in your opinion on the Crop Rotation Act, is there things that should, because it's all about what's best for the land, is what the original theme about this would be, that there's people not complying with that anymore, or is it not strong enough, it needs to be looked at, or?
Well, as I said, and it's important, and thank you for you, is that my report was 7 years ago. Okay. I was just flabbergasted that at that time the executive director of the Federation said of 75%. My first reaction, I was good, and I realized that it's not good. And I was doing up around your area, and there was a break, and I went into the washroom, and there was a fellow in there. He says, "Do you know this place down the road here?" He says, "in the wintertime," he says, "you can barely see. There's so much stuff in the air." And I said, "Poor snow removal?" "No," he says, the soil's flying both sides of the road. And I said, "What have you done about it?" "Oh," he says, I called up to the government and told them about it." And I said, "Oh yeah, what did they say?" "They wanted to know what proof I had." He said, "Well, I've just driven through it. I can barely get through it." So, you know, that type of sort of situation. But I do mention in my report, Mr. Henderson, that I detected that there was increased cooperation between the crop insurance program and the and to that you had to do certain things, and all of those things. None of us are a separate entity in government and all of this stuff. It's working together, and it's a whole bunch of things. But I had great support in my program with JP Arsenault and about soil conditions like this, and I said, "You know, JP, I don't need to know all of this stuff. I just need to know that you know it and you satisfy me that you have." So in a technical sense, I can't get into too many technical details, but I guess I would have thought that farmers would have been somehow capable of policing themselves when it comes to but I'm also a farmer's son. I know how that doesn't work.
Anyway, no, I just wanted to sort of kind of correct a little bit that I hope today it's not 75% that are not
Well, I
compliant.
hope so too.
I would hope it's close to 100, awfully close to 100% or 100%. My third question, and it sort of leads in a little bit to you made the comment about the land bank, the Land Development Corporation, and I think you've mentioned about, you know, a fund to purchase land. Well, the province does have a fund right now called the Land Acquisitions Fund. The problem is there's not very much money in it, and most of the
That's sort of a big problem.
It is, yeah, and well, that, once again, land value and prices. I think one of the issues is that it tends to be more used for safety issues around intersections and corners and things of that nature. But it's out there for to be used, is for sure. And but one of the things that I think, and you mentioned that it's been 7 years since your report was issued. We've seen a lot of changes, and you're seeing it right now with Indigenous people's rights and some of those land claim settlements, or the lack thereof land claim settlements in Prince Edward Island. I represent the Lennox Island region. Now knowing that some of these changes that are occurring, and we're also seeing cases where land has actually been challenged, going to the Supreme Court of Canada over purchases of land from the public to the private sector. Is there anything that you would see that would reflect in your report that would change that? Because I would think that the Mi'kmaq people would claim that they are actually the owners of the land and we are users of that land. So does that change the dynamic? Because one of my thoughts is that I think it does change the dynamic a little bit of land banks in the respect of, under the old LDC concept, was a way that farmers could lease land back and then eventually purchase it in future. Under land bank settlements now, that may be a challenge to sort of transfer that land back. So we don't want to go back to that case of being a tenant landowner forever to the government or to the Crown. So, I'm kind of curious to what your views would be on Indigenous land claim issues and how that might pertain to what we're talking about here in land ownership.
Well, I sort of alluded earlier on that this was the first time that I've spoken publicly since November 2013, and I've tried to be as candid and forthright as I can. And it's also my intention, after I thank the chair for being here this morning, I intend to revert to that role immediately of silence today. Okay? But since we're not quite there yet, there were some informal discussions between the Commission and Indigenous organization about the opportunity to meet and discuss. And for various reasons beyond my control, that opportunity and meeting never occurred. Having said that, is that I believe that there is, thank you for tying this into land banking, I think there is a point of view out there that discussion of Indigenous unceded rights might adversely affect land banking. And my comment to that is very quick. Surely governments and people who are involved in that discussion on this important issue of ceded or unceded land are capable of coming to a resolution of that doesn't prohibit land banking of some form in this province. I would like to think there is sufficient goodwill on all sides that would be the case. Furthermore, if it can't technically go into a land banking system, and I really like the idea of a land banking system because it helps everybody which way, then guess what? We'll come up with another solution, and that solution could will be that the government acts as a guarantor in some type of a unique situation of an option to buy with the young farmer and so forth. I am of the opinion that all of these things are capable of solution if they are approached with the right position.
Just a final comment. I might have a few more questions, but maybe others too. But I think but we do have a fund that is there, and I think that's where I sort of see is the opportunity. Once again, it comes back to the amount of money. So I think the Department of Finance has a fund where it'll lend money to farmers to purchase land at a very reduced interest rate, and that might be a way to get around that issue. So I agree with you that it either has to come with negotiation or discussion or a creative way to work that out. So when a farmer does want to buy land from another farmer, that we can lend them the money to do that, or at least allow them to acquire that, and it doesn't have to go into Crown
Absolutely.
ownership.
And there are some farmers out there who want Mr. Henderson to dispose of their land, but they're very selective who they want it to dispose to. And, without being disrespectful to any farming aspect, is that, I'm sorry, but some farmers aren't going to be able to buy that land because the vendor says, I don't want that to happen.
That's good for now.
Thanks, Robert. Steve?
Thank you, Chair. Well, thank you, Mr. Carver, for coming in here today, and I'd second the Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition's remarks on imparting some political wisdom to us, particularly with relation to where we're coming from here. And you quite rightly point out that it's our job here to determine where we're going to go here today. So in your report, you had several items related to access to information and transparency and whatnot, free geolink access for the public, IRAC's annual report to the public, those within 25% of their limits, certifying and writing their holdings and the like, all not implemented. And you also quite rightly point out, in my opinion, that it's every time there's public outcry, we get some sort of action and reinforcement from government. And you also quite rightly point out that the new Business Corporations Act gets rid of some of this access to information. We can't access the shareholders anymore, know who owns what. So that is creating a detachment and a lack of public trust in what's going on. So we could define the spirit and intent of the Act all we like. If we don't have access to the information to know if it's being enforced or not, then it's probably a moot point. So I'd just like to get your opinion that the most important aspect of this is access to information flowing out to the public to reestablish that trust in what's going on, and also to ensure that accountability is there, because the whole idea is to protect the land for islanders, and who better to be the stewards of that than the islanders themselves?
Right. As I said in my shared value number 1, which I took that both agricultural organizations support, the land is a public trust, and because of this, all islanders have an interest in its stewardship. And that goes on to about water and air and everything like that. And, it hasn't come out today, but there's a narrow point of view out there that if a person owns the land, then that's it. They do whatever they want and so forth. I just think that there is a larger interest of public good in this particular regard. The unfortunate thing about the Business Corporations Act is that, and you weren't here at the time, but it got passed in the last House, I would say, without the members knowing what in fact they passed. And I say that with the greatest respect to the members that are here today, that were there. I don't believe it was your personal fault. I believe that the system of the House let you down. And that's why I spent so much time earlier making suggestions how to deal with some of these situations. But be that as it may, let's seize upon the opportunity. I think an amendment was made before to do certain things and so forth. To answer your larger question, if you are a client of mine, by now you would know that a word that I use all the time in my practice, and in fact in my life, is the word trust. I think it's the most important quality that we have as a relationship with individuals is trust. And once that is lost, it is hard to regain, but it's not lost forever. I believe that what's happened in the Business Corporation Act needs to be but a stepping stone to do other things, some of which I've given examples. And then my examples, Mr. Howard, may be wrong. They may not be practical, but they're worth talking and examining and seeing what can happen. We have to increase transparency. If there's one thing that I believe that people out there want to know is numbered companies, shareholder, federal corporations, and other problems authorized to do business here. Do we know who the shareholders are? And you may say that's pretty simple to find out. Well, guess what? It is not. Because you can go down various tiers, you eventually get into trusts and this, that, and everything else. There's also a provision in either the regs or the act that gives the minister the authority to give an exemption to providing information if they think it is not in the public interest for doing so. But I believe that what happened with the Companies Act, Business Corporation Act is but an opportunity. And it can be done, and it can be done separately from whatever's going on with the Lands Protection 2.0.
Stephen?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'd agree that that is something that we can tackle fairly straightforwardly, but I guess just as maybe a yes or no question, would you see transparency and access to information as the most vital part of these changes that we might not need to see in place?
I learned a long time ago that I like asking the yes or no questions, but I don't like giving the answers yes or no. I think there are a lot of important things that can be done to increase this. There's some baby steps, some larger steps, and everything else. The interest that I see here today among committee members is refreshing. It's reassuring, and I'm expecting great things from working together in this unique house, which is not always going to be this composition.
That's fine, Chair. Thanks.
Lynn?
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to return to a moment to the theme of what's best for the land. And it springs to mind for me that what's best for the land is also in the long term what's best for the economy. We know that soil organic matter levels have been decreasing over the island over years, and you've highlighted that in your report. And also your report points out correctly that yields go down significantly when soil organic matters decrease. So I think in the long term, we have an interest in seeing that improve both for our land and for our economic benefit to farmers. As we're moving in, as Michelle pointed out, to Land Protection Act 2.0, I'm just wondering if you have any opinion on what sort of considerations we need to ensure in it to make sure that the idea that what's best for the land is at the heart of our land ownership laws.
Well, without being too quick on it, is to maintain a constant visual on everything, that there'll never be another slip up on the Corporations Act and various other things. I sometimes have felt over the years that politicians tiptoe around the Lands Protection Act and hope they can get through a House or get through a government without addressing it because they're afraid that it might blow up in their face. Like, I feel that. And if they act with openness and transparency and lots of public input, and if people aren't feeling as if someone's trying to do something in a certain way, I think it might be surprising what level of public support there is out there. This is a very, very unique place. This is an unbelievable place. This past year, I have had the privilege of presenting 2 IRAC applications for people to come to this province. And the documentation that I presented included upwards of 15 or 18 letters of recommendation from people here and people elsewhere. The people elsewhere were the ones that didn't want them to leave their jurisdiction and come here. And I had them write their own letters to give the sense of feeling and why they want to come. And do you know that these individuals are remarkable individuals, have so much to offer to this particular province and community. And yet, each of those individuals had to pay significant fees at IREC. Significant. I'm talking not a couple $100, I'm talking in excess of many thousands of dollars. Anybody that looks at the application would just say, where's the rubber stamp, send it down to government. But, and I recommended in my report that if those people come here within 2 years, they get all their fee back. Didn't happen. They never made the amendment or anything like that whatsoever. And the other thing I'd like to say, and there's a couple of things I should have said in my report, and one I feel a little bad about, and that is, I did not salute those non-residents of Prince Edward Island who spend so much time of every year living in this province, who feel passionately about this province, and who have concern for this province. I didn't salute them, and in retrospect, what I should have done is, if I'd been doing it other than in the winter time, probably would have put something out there about that regard. And you know, some of those individuals, I am convinced, might give money to a land trust, and they might even give the land themselves. The former minister, Mr. Brown, saw me one day in the street, or I should say I saw him and pigeonholed him, and made some comments about certain things, and he says, well, he says, you don't know what we're doing on this. Oh, tell me, Richard, what you're doing. Well, he says, we're sending a letter out to all the non-resident taxpayers in this province that if they want to, the Crown will accept their land. I said, you know what? That's a fabulous idea. Absolutely fabulous. I don't know if it ever happened or not. I don't know how many land transfers have taken place, but that's the type of creative thinking we need to approach on some of this stuff. I know it's a good idea, whether it was carried out or whether an election happened, I don't know.
Lynn?
Thank you, Chair. I'm just wondering if you think it would be valuable, or viable for that matter, to integrate soil health requirements into the holding limits.
I feel that I'm not qualified to answer that. Good try, third time round. And I don't say that facetiously, I just compliment you on it. I just feel that I don't have enough personal knowledge about it. And I know it's important, because if something happens to this 10 inches of soil and when it's being mined or something like that, then we've got real problem. We might have land, but we don't have productive land. And if we don't have productive land, then we don't have a viable economic society. And no viable economic, we don't have a real society. We don't have real communities and everything like this. It's a complicated issue. I just feel I'm not the right person to give you those answers.
Sydney?
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Horace, so much for coming in. I remember back then at the public meeting in Morel during your crusade across the province, and it's ironic that we're here today.
It is.
A bunch of things, but I just a comment. When you talk about the moral authority from the public to go forward with these changes, and Michelle had mentioned that, the act coming to change, and I know that that's going out to a public consultation, and I think the big thing that's important is not to do, reinvent the wheel again. You've got your report, we've got all the information, we've heard from everybody, but it's to get what are the tangible changes, and then let's talk about that in public, not unlike the Water Act. We've seen the changes, people could sink their teeth into it. And I think that's the exciting part for this assembly with us, our 27 MLAs. And you've made the point a couple of times and haven't come right out and said it, but we are in a very unique situation to get this done. And it won't be done to everybody's perfection, but we're going to make really good changes, and we're going to see that really good debate this winter. And I'm hoping that the minister's going to be reaching out to all of the caucuses to tell us how this is going forward, because I know since 2015 it's been in, the topic of the Lands Protection Act has come up in almost all of our own caucus meetings. I'm sure it's the same with everybody else, and that was in opposition and in government, right up until this day. So I think we're in a really good, exciting position. I'm looking forward to this, to the rest of the winter and going forward into the spring. The other thing is I want to mention about what Robbie mentioned too about the land bank and about that duty to consult. And I echo your comments. I think if there is a solution, no problem to that. If our Indigenous leaders, I think they would absolutely, it's all about the proper consultation and what you're going to do going forward. And I think as a legislature, if we don't have some sort of a form of a land bank or land holdings going forward, that it will be a failure. I think we need that going forward. So I just want to make public comment about, what's going to happen, hopefully this winter and spring, about the public consultation on actual changes, and I'm looking forward to hopefully that becoming, that details being rolled out soon to the public and to our caucuses. And I appreciate you coming in today and your message as well, so thank you.
You're very welcome, and I'm sure a lot of people look forward to what's going to happen, and just have to remember that legislation is but legislation at one point in time, and when it needs to be amended or changed, and that's what happens, and a person who occupies the position of government house leader occupies an important role to make sure these things happen.
We all do. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Do we have any more questions for Mr. Carver? We are kind of
Over the time.
staff need to eat before the next committee meeting. Any? No? Any, I guess, final comments? Or
I'd just like to thank you for inviting me. It was a personal decision to be quiet for 7 years. With my occupation, interest in these matters, sometimes it wasn't always easy. And but I thought that when the invitation came, I would accept it. I would have accepted it, even if I disagreed with anything that was happening, which I don't. And I just like to thank you. And as I said before, I intend to go in silent mode after I go outside the bar again, and will watch with interest what this House does. You are tasked with huge responsibility. You are tasked with trying some solutions and going down some roads that probably hasn't happened for a long time in this particular regard. And it's important, absolutely important. I wish you all the best. Thank you.
Thank you. And the committee thanks you for taking the time out of your day to come and present and accepting our invitation. So we appreciate it very much. Thank you. We'll just recess momentarily. And Continue. Next order of business is review of correspondence, which is simply just the letter that the committee sent to Mr. Carver. So there's not too much there. And next is review of scheduling, and we meet, I believe it's the 29th.
Is it?
I think so. Couple weeks.
The 30th.
30th, sorry. Zoe, that's good. Do we have any new business? Robert?
The only thing I would add on this, and it's pretty minor, but then other topics committees have suggested no particular order. I wouldn't mind adding in something to do with our livestock strategy issue. I mean, we had some pretty extensive debates in the House. It was moved in a motion, and the minister seemed to accept developing that. So I wouldn't mind getting a bit of an update on that, or, you know, what the steps are going to be to actually implement it. So I'll just add it to the list of topics, and you can,
Yeah.
if the committee then is so in agreement to bump it up or down, whatever, in the mix of it.
All right. So
If
maybe something-
that's permissible.
Maybe perhaps at the next meeting we can discuss it, which is in 30th.
Yeah. So do I have to make a motion to add it to that?
Yes.
I do. So I'd like to make a motion to add an update on the livestock strategy to our other topics that have been suggested in no particular order.
Okay. Discussion. Sydney?
Thank you, Chair. It's a great idea, but can you clarify, are you looking for like do you want a written submission first and then to ask the minister in, or would you just like to ask the minister in to present on it?
To say, ask the minister in to kind of give us an update on where that's at and what his vision and views would be on it, if that's suitable. But I'll take a letter if that's in light of not yet getting that.
Sydney?
Thank you, Chair. And I just update me too. So did the minister says there's a livestock strategy ongoing, and that's what you want to update on, or have you guys just talked, like, just be specific with your ask, or you won't get what you want, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Robert?
Well, I guess where I'm coming from is that I moved a motion in this legislature that was approved unanimously in the legislature for the province to implement a livestock strategy, and a livestock strategy was to be a bit more than just a beef strategy, because there is a beef strategy ongoing at the moment. And it did pass in this House, and the minister, in his response to in that discussion, said that thought it was a good idea and that they would work towards that. So I'm just trying to advance the cause of it a little bit more, as it's I'm not saying it's personal to me, but it's I think an issue that also helps with the issues that we're dealing with land and soil health and things of that nature. So the quicker a strategy can be put in place to implement that, then we'll start to see the benefits from that strategy. But I'm not the expert of what the strategy should be. I can kind of give my personal views on that, but so that's where I'm thinking a little more than just a letter back would be appreciative from my perspective, but I'd also reiterate it was a legislative support of that motion unanimously, so that's why I'm thinking it should kind of be a priority then.
Sydney?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so I would suggest maybe just rephrase your motion to say, in light of the decision made in the legislature to support this motion unanimously, we ask the minister to come in to discuss what's ongoing and a new, something. I mean, just put some put teeth into it, and then so they'll have something. And I would suggest we get them in to present, not just a letter.
Do you want to amend it, Sydney? Robert can amend his motion.
Just, yeah, I'll amend it to say, in addition to in light of the motion passed in the previous sitting of the legislature on the livestock strategy, this committee invite the minister in to present.
Any discussion on the amendment? Question? Shall it carry?
Carried. Good idea.
Shall the motion as amended carry? Oh, I think so.
I'd like to add a topic to our work plan. Could we get...
Sorry.
We should just make sure the motion as amended carries first.
Shall the motion as amended carry?
Carried.
Carried. Stephen?
Thank you, Chair. If we could add to our work plan that we get an update on the progress with the PEI energy strategy, perhaps get the head of the Energy Corporation in here and the deputy to give us an update on the overall progress.
Anyone have any questions or discussion on it? No? Me and that.
Yep.
All right. Anything further? Or Sydney?
So, Steve, did you say the head of the who and the deputy minister? And the deputy minister? Good idea.
Okay. Any further new business? No? Do we have a motion to adjourn? Moved by Linton. Shall it carry?